They say the sound of rain at a funeral means heaven is weeping with you, but that day it just felt cruel. Cold drops slid off the black umbrellas and onto the dirt where they'd just lowered Raymond's coffin. Each thud of wet soil against the lid made me flinch. I'd heard that sound before, back when my mother passed, but never like this. This one carried 42 years of shared laughter, secrets, and promises being buried beneath the mud. I stood there, holding a damp tissue that was more water than paper, staring at the name on the polished wood, Raymond Thomas Walker. My husband. My anchor, my fool. My love. I kept thinking he'd sit up, crack one of his jokes, say, "All right, that's enough crying, let's go home." But the rain kept falling, and the pastor kept talking, and the world kept pretending this was just another funeral. Maybe it was for them, but not for me. My whole life was in that box, 6 feet down. After everyone started leaving, I stayed back. My son Mark came up to me, umbrella tilted so I could stand under it too. "Mom," he said softly, "you should come home. You'll get sick standing out here." I nodded, but I didn't move. My feet felt planted in the ground. "Go on ahead," I told him. "I'll come later." He hesitated, like he wanted to say more, then just sighed. "All right. Melissa's got some soup going. Try to eat when you get back." He kissed my cheek and walked off. I watched him go, his arm around his wife's shoulder, her face half hidden behind her black hat. When I finally turned toward the car, I saw her looking back at me. Melissa. That polite, perfect smile she always wore, the kind that never reached her eyes. I'd told Raymond once that something about her smile made me uneasy. He'd laughed it off. "You just don't like anyone who tries too hard, Elaine," he said. Maybe he was right. Or maybe I just saw through her sooner than anyone else did. I didn't know it then. But that woman would be the one standing in my kitchen less than 24 hours later, already asking about paperwork. That night, the house felt too quiet. I made 2 cups of coffee out of habit, then caught myself halfway through pouring his. It was a small thing, but it broke me. I left it there, half full on the counter, and sat at the table, tracing the rim of the cup with my finger. It had his fingerprint still smudged on the handle. I told myself I'd wash it tomorrow, but tomorrow came and went, and that cup stayed there for weeks. It was like he might come back and finish it. The next morning, I woke up to a knock at the door. For a second, I thought it was Mark. Maybe he was checking in. But when I opened it, there stood Melissa. Dressed in beige slacks and a pressed white blouse, not a trace of grief left on her face. She carried a leather folder under her arm. "Elaine," she said, stepping right past me like it was her home. "You poor thing. I thought you could use some company," I nodded, forcing a smile. "That's kind of you." She sat down at the kitchen table, crossed her legs, and placed the folder between us. "Mark's at work," she began, "but he asked me to help you with some of the paperwork. There's a lot to sort through. Bank accounts, insurance, the cabin, things you shouldn't have to deal with alone." I looked at her hands resting on the folder. Perfect nails, pale pink polish. Hands that had never seen a day of hard work. "You've been very quick about this," I said quietly. Her smile didn't falter. "It's better to handle things now before it all piles up." "Right," I said. "And what exactly are you handling?" "Well," she said, opening the folder, "we just need you to sign a few things. Transfer of ownership for the rental cabin, permission for Mark to manage the insurance claim. You'll still have full rights, of course. This is just a formality." I could hear Raymond's voice in my head then, plain as day. "Don't sign anything you don't understand, Elaine." So I didn't. I pushed the folder back toward her. "I'll need to look at these first," I said. "Raymond handled all our papers himself. I want to see where we stand before I sign anything." She tilted her head, that same sympathetic look plastered on her face. "Of course, take your time," she said sweetly. "It's just that Mark's been worried about you. He thinks it might be too much stress right now." I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. Tell Mark I appreciate his concern. I'll handle my own stress." Her smile wavered, just for a second, before she collected her things. "All right," she said. "I'll tell him. You rest now." After she left, I stood by the window and watched her get into her car. She didn't go straight home. She sat there for a while, talking on her phone, gesturing with her hands. I couldn't hear her words, but I didn't need to. Something in my gut twisted. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, counting the faint hum of the refrigerator in the next room. Everything Raymond had ever handled was somewhere in this house. The bank papers, the property deeds, the will. But where exactly? The next morning, I went into his study. The smell of cedar and tobacco hit me the moment I opened the door. He'd always kept the room tidy, but this time it felt too clean. His brown leather briefcase sat in the corner, locked. Raymond was old-fashioned. He liked physical copies of everything, kept duplicates in that briefcase. I found the small key taped behind his desk drawer. Inside, everything looked orderly, too orderly. Files stacked perfectly, but one folder caught my eye. It was labeled insurance, but was empty. Another labeled house deed had been replaced with a photocopy, not the original. And then I saw it. A small folded piece of paper, tucked between receipts. It was in Raymond's handwriting. His real handwriting. Tight and neat, the way he always wrote grocery lists and notes for me. It said, "If anything happens to me, don't trust the signatures. Trust your gut." My knees gave out right there on the rug. I held that paper like it was him talking from beyond the grave. My breath came in shaky bursts. The room felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. If he'd written that, it meant he'd known something was wrong. That someone had tried to forge something before he died. And there was only one person who'd be desperate enough to do that. Mark. Or maybe not him alone. Melissa's perfect smile flashed in my mind again. By afternoon, I found myself at the bank. I must have looked like a ghost walking in, still wearing black, my hair unbrushed. The teller, a young woman named Mara, recognized me from the times Raymond and I used to come together. She smiled gently. "Mrs. Walker, I'm so sorry for your loss." I nodded. "Thank you, dear. I just need to check something about our joint account." She pulled up the file, her eyes scanning the screen. After a pause, her expression changed. There have been some withdrawals," she said carefully. My stomach dropped. "Withdrawals? When?" The first one was 3 days before Mr. Walker's passing. Then 2 more last week, all authorized by your son, Mark Walker. "That can't be," I said, shaking my head. "Raymond would never—" She turned the monitor toward me, showing the scanned document. My husband's name signed neatly at the bottom, except it wasn't his. The slant was wrong, the curve too sharp? "Do you have a copy of that?" I asked quietly. She hesitated, glancing around. "I'm not supposed to, but I'll print one for you." When I got back to my car, I sat there staring at that paper until my eyes blurred. My hands were shaking. I thought about calling Mark, demanding an explanation. But part of me already knew what I'd hear. Deflection, denial, maybe even anger. So instead, I called Raymond's old lawyer, Thomas Green. He'd retired years ago, but he answered the phone like he still expected clients to call. "Elaine Walker," he said, his voice warm but heavy. "It's been a long time. How are you holding up?" I didn't waste time. "Thomas, I found something. I think someone forged Raymond's signature, maybe on more than one thing. His will's missing, the insurance papers too." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Elaine, do not sign or hand over anything to anyone until we talk. And check the county records tomorrow. If the deed's been moved or transferred, it'll be there." That night I didn't sleep again. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cup still sitting there from the morning before Raymond died. My house was filled with ghosts. His voice, his shirts hanging in the closet, the faint smell of his cologne on the pillow. But for the first time, I also felt anger creeping in. A slow, steady burn beneath the grief, They thought burying him meant they could bury the truth too. They were wrong. Before I continue, if you're hearing this, thank you for listening. This is Stories Her Heart Holds, and I'm Elaine Walker, telling you what really happened after they put my husband in the ground and tried to take everything he left behind. They thought I'd fold, thought I'd grieve quietly while they cleaned me out. But they didn't know the kind of woman I am, because I may have lost my husband that week, but I hadn't lost my fight. And by the time I was done, every single one of them would regret ever underestimating me. The morning after I sat at the kitchen table staring at Raymond's coffee cup, I drove to the county office. The rain had stopped, leaving everything slick and shiny, and I felt like the world itself was trying to wash away the dirt, the betrayal, and the lies. I held Raymond's note in my hand, the one that told me not to trust signatures and to trust my gut. My gut had never been wrong, not once. The clerk looked at me like I was a visitor from another time. "Mrs. Walker," she said politely, "how can I help you today?" "I need to see the public records for the Walker cabin on Seaview Lane," I said, keeping my voice steady. "And also any recent transfers of property connected to Raymond Walker." She typed for a moment, then her eyebrows knitted together. "It looks like there's been a transfer. Yes, filed 3 days after Mr. Walker passed. The property is now under the name of Mark Walker." I felt my stomach drop. My own son had taken the cabin. I swallowed hard, my hands gripping the folder in front of me. "Was there a will filed?" I asked. "Raymond had a will, right?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Nothing's been filed here. I can only show what's in the public record. Nothing. Not a will. Not the insurance papers. Not the cabin deed. Nothing except Mark's name signed confidently on everything." I left the office shaking. My car felt smaller somehow, the roads narrower. I drove home thinking about all the afternoons Raymond had spent fixing that cabin, painting the shutters, sanding the decks. That cabin was more than a building. It was his pride, his memory, and now it had been stolen from me while I was still mourning him. When I got home, the house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I opened the briefcase again. I had to make sure I hadn't missed anything. Every folder, every envelope, every piece of paper had to be checked. And then I found something hidden behind the old tax receipts. A series of notes in Raymond's handwriting dated over the last year. Each one was a warning. Notes about meetings, about calls he received, about documents that suddenly went missing. "Do not trust Mark," one said. "Melissa is helping him. Keep originals safe." I sank to the floor, the notes trembling in my hands. My son and Melissa. They were planning this. They had planned this. All along, I called Thomas Green immediately. "Thomas," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "They took everything. They forged signatures, transferred property, and there's no will. I don't know what to do." He paused, then said, "Elaine, listen to me carefully. Don't confront them yet. We need proof. Every document, every bank record. I'll help you gather it. But you have to be careful. This is serious, careful." I had never been so careful in my life. I had raised my son, to be honest. Raymond had always believed in the goodness of people. But now I had to abandon both of those beliefs. I had to think like they thought, anticipate their moves, find their lies, and trap them in their own deception. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt colder, emptier than ever. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat in the living room, staring out at the dark water of the bay. I imagined Raymond sitting across from me, his hands wrapped around his own cup, saying, "Elaine, you know what to do." I did know. The next morning, I started with the banks. I gathered every statement I could, every withdrawal, every check. Some were obvious, small amounts probably to test the waters, but others were large, enough to drain the account if I didn't act fast. And then there were the loans. Loans I hadn't known existed, taken out in Raymond's name, signed by Mark. I called the bank manager, a serious man named Harlan. "I need these transactions frozen," I said firmly. "All of them. No transfers, no withdrawals. My husband is deceased, and there is suspicion of forgery." Harlan hesitated, but he could hear the steel in my voice. "Mrs. Walker will handle it immediately. Can you provide proof of your relationship and your claim?" I hung up and opened the briefcase again. Raymond had kept copies of everything: the birth certificates, the property deeds, the insurance policies, and the keys to every lock in the house. He had left me a trail. I just had to follow it. Then I realized something crucial. They thought they were clever, moving fast after the funeral, trying to act before anyone noticed. But in their haste, they had left gaps, mistakes. A signature here that didn't match. A bank form that didn't have the right dates. Emails that hadn't been deleted. I started taking pictures of everything. Every note, every paper, every receipt. I made copies, scanned files, backed up every scrap of evidence. It felt like I was building a fortress out of paper and ink. Raymond's last gift to me wasn't money or property. It was information. The knowledge of what mattered. And I wasn't about to let it slip away. Days passed. I kept checking the cabin remotely, calling neighbors, seeing if anything unusual had happened. Melissa and Mark visited under the guise of concern, but I could feel their eyes sizing up the house, counting the windows, measuring the walls in their minds. They thought I was weak, that I'd crumble under grief. But they underestimated me. I started leaving subtle messages, small notes around the house, pretending I wasn't paying attention, but I was always watching. Every phone call I returned, every visit I allowed, I did so with a plan. I began to record conversations, just snippets, just enough to catch lies. It was exhausting. It was terrifying. And yet I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. Every instinct I had honed raising children, managing a household, surviving life's unexpected blows, came flooding back. I was a mother, a widow, and now a warrior. One evening, I sat in the study with all the papers spread around me. I traced each transaction, each forged signature, every missing document. A pattern emerged. It wasn't just the cabin or the bank accounts. They had been planning to take everything systematically. And they had assumed that because Raymond was gone, I would be paralyzed by grief. I picked up the phone and called Thomas again. "Thomas, I've got it," I said. "I see the pattern. They left themselves trails. We can prove the forgery. We can stop them." He laughed, but it was a quiet, relieved laugh. "Elaine, I knew you'd find it. Now we just need to move carefully and legally. We can't rush, but we can fight back. And we will." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the window staring out at the water, thinking about Raymond and how proud he would be. I whispered into the dark, "I won't let them take what's ours. I'll make sure they pay for this. I promise." By the time dawn came, I had made a plan. I would start small, gather undeniable evidence, document every lie, every theft, every deceit. And then I would confront them, not with anger, not with tears, but with the truth. A truth so clear, so undeniable, they wouldn't be able to escape it. They thought burying him meant they had buried me too. They were wrong, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt a spark of hope. The morning after I promised myself I'd fight, I drove out to Seaview Lane. I hadn't been back to the cabin since before Raymond died. It used to be our escape, quiet, peaceful, smelling of pine and salt air. The place where we'd sit on the porch with our feet on the railing and watch the sun dip into the ocean. The drive out there felt longer this time. The trees leaned in closer, the air heavier somehow. When I pulled up, I saw a new lock on the front gate. It hadn't been there before. My heart pounded as I got out of the car. I walked up to the gate, running my fingers along the cold metal. Someone had been here. Someone wanted me out. I didn't have the key, but I did have bolt cutters in the trunk. Raymond always kept a set for emergencies, and this felt like one. The lock snapped, the sound sharp in the still morning air. I pushed the gate open and walked up the path. The grass had been freshly cut. The porch light had been replaced. Someone was taking care of the place, and it sure wasn't me. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air smelled different, cleaner, newer. Melissa's perfume, a faint floral sweetness that made my stomach turn. I walked slowly through each room, running my fingers along the furniture, the window frames, the walls. My pictures were gone. The photo of Raymond and me from our 30th anniversary, gone. The old quilt on the sofa, gone. Even the coffee mugs we used to keep on the counter were replaced. It wasn't our cabin anymore. It was theirs. On the kitchen table was a stack of papers. I picked them up. Renovation plans, permits, and at the bottom, a brochure with the words, Willow Bend Coastal Rentals, Luxury Beach Stays. I flipped it over, and there it was. Property managed by Mark and Melissa Walker. They were turning it into a business. Our cabin. Raymond's cabin. The one he built with his bare hands. I felt the anger rise in me, slow and hot. I left everything as it was, walked back to my car, and drove straight to Thomas's office. I hadn't seen him in years, but the moment he saw me walk in, his face softened. "Elaine," he said, standing to hug me. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I've seen worse," I said. I went to the cabin. He gestured for me to sit. "What did you find?" I told him everything. The new lock, the renovation plans, the business brochure. He listened quietly, his brow furrowing deeper with every word. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "They're moving fast. They want the assets transferred before the insurance comes through. Once that happens, it'll be much harder to reverse." "Then we stop them now," I said firmly. He nodded. "We can, but we need one more thing. Proof that Raymond never signed that power of attorney. If we can show the signature is forged, everything else falls apart." I took a deep breath. "How do we prove it?" "Handwriting expert," he said, "but we'll need samples of his signature, real ones. Preferably from legal documents." I knew exactly where to find them. Raymond had kept every warranty, every contract, every letter in a metal box in the attic. I drove home and climbed the stairs, the air thick with dust and memories. The box was right where I remembered, tucked behind an old trunk of winter clothes. Inside were dozens of papers, each one signed neatly in that familiar steady hand. I packed them into a folder and drove back to Thomas's office. He took one look and smiled. "Perfect. This will do it." I left his office feeling a mix of dread and relief. The truth was out there now, waiting to be proven. But proof doesn't always bring peace. Sometimes it just makes the betrayal sharper. That night, my phone rang. It was Mark. "Mom," he said, his tone careful, rehearsed. "I heard you've been asking questions. Going through Dad's stuff." "I have," I said evenly. "Why?" he sighed. "Mom, you're making things harder for everyone. Dad wanted me to handle the financial stuff. He told me before the accident." "Funny," I said, "because there's no record of that, and the signatures on those documents don't match his." He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "You're grieving. You're confused. Melissa and I are just trying to help." "Help yourselves, maybe," I snapped. "You forged his name, Mark. You took the cabin. You drained the accounts. You buried your father and tried to rob your mother in the same week." "Mom, stop," he said sharply. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know enough," I said quietly. "And soon everyone else will too." He started to say something else, but I hung up. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, I just sat there in the dark, the only light coming from the lamp on the side table, and whispered, "Raymond, I hope you can see me." "I'm doing what you'd want." 2 days later, Thomas called. Elaine, the handwriting expert, confirmed it. "The signature on the power of attorney is forged. No doubt about it. The bank will have to freeze the account until it's settled legally. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. Thank you, Thomas. He hesitated. There's something else, though. I checked the life insurance policy you mentioned. It's been filed by Mark. The payout request is already pending. How? I said. It was missing from the briefcase. He must have had a copy, Thomas said. Or someone helped him get one. But if we can show forgery on one document, it'll put every other claim into question. Just stay calm. Let me handle the legal side. You keep gathering what you can. After we hung up, I went outside and sat on the porch. The sky was streaked with orange and pink, the kind of sunset Raymond used to photograph. For a moment, I let myself imagine him sitting beside me, his hand over mine. I wanted to believe he could see what I was doing, that he was proud of me. But the peace didn't last. That night, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside. Slow, deliberate steps across the gravel. I got out of bed and looked through the window. Nothing. Then faintly, a car door closed. Headlights flashed once, then disappeared down the road. I stood there in the dark, heart hammering, realizing that they were watching me now. Maybe checking if I'd found something. Maybe trying to scare me. But they didn't know I'd already stopped being afraid. The next morning, I drove back to the cabin. I needed to see something for myself. As I parked, I noticed tire tracks in the dirt. Someone had been there recently. I walked around the back and saw a black SUV parked behind the shed. My stomach tightened. I hid behind the corner of the cabin and watched as Melissa stepped out, her phone pressed to her ear. "No, she doesn't know yet," she said, her voice low but clear. "The lawyer's handling it. Once it clears, we're good." She paused, listening. "Yeah, she won't fight it. She's old, tired. Old, tired." I gritted my teeth. I wanted to march up and confront her right there, but I knew better. I pulled out my phone and hit record. I captured every word she said. When she finally drove off, I stepped out from behind the shed. I looked up at the sky, the seagulls circling overhead, and I whispered, "You picked the wrong woman, Melissa." Back home, I played the recording for Thomas. He listened carefully. "This is good," he said. "Really good. It proves intent. We'll use it. Just don't tell them you have it." I smiled for the first time in days. "Oh, I won't." The next week was a blur of phone calls, paperwork, and meetings. Thomas filed the complaint. The bank froze the accounts. The insurance company put the payout on hold. Every move we made tightened the net. Mark tried to call. I didn't answer. Melissa sent texts, apologies, explanations, even guilt trips. I deleted them all. I didn't need their words anymore. I had proof, but something inside me still ached. Because beneath all the anger, all the betrayal, there was still love. He was my son. The same boy who used to run barefoot across the beach, who brought me seashells, who cried when his goldfish died. I didn't know when that boy had turned into a man who could do this to me. Maybe grief changes people, or maybe greed just reveals who they've been all along. One evening I sat by the water again, the waves slow and steady, the wind cold on my face. I closed my eyes and said softly, "Raymond, it's working. We're getting closer, but I miss you so much." The truth was, I'd have traded every document, every dollar, every cabin, just to have him back for one more conversation. But since I couldn't, I would do the next best thing. Make sure his name wasn't dragged through the mud by the people who should have honored it. They thought I was just an old widow too broken to fight. But I was more alive than ever. The morning after I recorded Melissa, I felt a strange mix of fear and determination. The fear wasn't about the law anymore. It was about the people I had once trusted with my life. My own son. And yet determination coursed through me like electricity. I had proof, and proof was power. But power, I knew, could be fragile. I went back to the cabin cautiously, during the quiet hours before dawn. The sky was a pale gray. and the air smelled of salt and pine, the same scent that had filled my lungs on so many happy mornings with Raymond. I moved quietly across the porch, peering through the windows. It was empty, not a sign of life. I stepped inside. The house still carried Melissa's perfume faintly, but now it mingled with the smell of the ocean, the smell of home. I opened drawers, cabinets, every little space I could think of. I found invoices, bills, and documents. They weren't all in order, and I noticed a few gaps, documents Mark had clearly missed in his rush. I took pictures of everything. Every paper, every receipt, every little note that might become evidence. I couldn't leave anything to chance. That evening I returned home, exhausted but not broken. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, looking at the stack of papers I had gathered. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I thought about Raymond, how he would have handled this, how he would have sat quietly and waited for the right moment, the right opportunity to act. That's what I had to do. Wait, observe, strike when the time was right. The next morning, the whispers in the neighborhood started. Someone had noticed my car parked at the cabin before sunrise. Rumors spread quickly in Willow Bend, and soon I could hear voices outside my window, low and cautious. Neighbors I had known for decades were now watching, curious and perhaps sympathetic. I felt their eyes on me, weighing me, wondering if the widow would crumble or fight. I went to the small diner in town to gather more information. The waitress, a kind woman named Joan, greeted me warmly. "Elaine, I heard about your troubles," she said. "People are talking," I nodded. "Yes, they're talking. But I need facts, Joan, not opinions." Joan leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I've heard that Mark and Melissa are trying to sell the cabin to someone from the city. Big money, flashy people. They're moving fast." I felt a surge of anger. "They think selling it will erase everything, don't they?" Joan shrugged. "Maybe, but some folks around here say they're pushing too hard. People don't forget around here, Elaine." I left the diner with more resolve. They were moving fast, but I had proof. The forged signatures, the recordings, the documents I had gathered, it was all evidence that could stop them. I just had to stay patient and meticulous. Back home, I spent hours on the phone with Thomas, going over every detail. He reminded me constantly to be cautious, to avoid confrontation. "Elaine, you have the evidence. Don't let them see you act out of anger," he warned. "We need to be strategic." But strategy didn't stop my anger. It didn't stop the ache in my chest every time I thought about my son and his wife plotting to take everything Raymond had built. I had spent decades raising Mark, teaching him honesty, respect, and responsibility. And now he had thrown all of that away. One afternoon, I received a package in the mail. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, unsigned. It was a notice from a real estate agent stating that the cabin was listed for sale. I held the paper in my hands, feeling its weight, feeling the audacity of it. My own family had listed Raymond's cabin for sale without my knowledge. They thought I would sit quietly, mourning while they made decisions for me. I didn't sit quietly. I picked up the phone and called Thomas immediately. "They've listed the cabin," I said, my voice tight. "They think they can push this through before anyone notices," Thomas exhaled. "We'll stop it, Elaine. We'll freeze the sale. You have the legal ground. We just need to file the injunction." That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at the porch, watching the waves crash against the rocks. I thought about Raymond, about how proud he would have been to see me fighting, not just for property, but for truth and justice. I whispered his name into the wind, imagining it carrying my promise. I won't let them take it. I'll make them answer for this. The next day, I decided to confront Mark directly. Not with rage, not with tears, but with evidence. I called him to the house under the guise of wanting to discuss the family finances calmly. I waited in the living room, my hands folded, my heart steady. Mark arrived, his usual confident air present. But there was something different. A slight hesitation. Maybe he sensed my resolve. "Mom," he said, stepping inside. "I thought we could talk." "Yes," I said, keeping my tone even. "We can talk about the cabin, the accounts, and the documents you've handled since Dad passed." He tried to steer the conversation, to reassure me that everything was above board. "Elaine, we're just trying to manage things. You've been grieving. Let us handle it." I shook my head. "No, I want to see everything. All the documents, the bank statements, the insurance forms, the cabin paperwork, everything you've touched since Dad died." His jaw tightened. "Mom, that's unnecessary. Thomas and I are handling it." I pulled out my folder, laying it on the table. Every page, every document I had photographed, every piece of evidence of forgery and deceit was there. His eyes flicked over them, and I saw something I hadn't seen before. Panic. "You think you can scare me with paperwork?" I asked softly. "These aren't just papers, Mark. These are the truth. And I intend to see it honored." He swallowed hard. "Mom, we can talk about this privately. No need to—" "No," I said, cutting him off. "We're talking about this right here. No private meetings. No hiding signatures. No deceit." For the first time, I saw him falter. He glanced toward the door as if considering an escape. Melissa appeared behind him suddenly, her face carefully composed, but her eyes darted to the folder on the table. "This isn't necessary," she said, her voice smooth but tight. "It is necessary," I said, standing now, "because you thought I wouldn't notice. You thought I would allow you to steal from me while I grieved. And I'm telling you, I will not let that happen." They looked at each other, then back at me. I could see the shift in their posture. The realization that this mother, this widow, wasn't afraid. That I had proof. That I was prepared to use it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just stood there, letting the weight of the evidence speak for itself. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, I saw the edge of their confidence start to crumble. After a long silence, Melissa spoke first. "Mom, maybe we can come to an agreement." "No," I said firmly. "There will be no agreement. You will undo what you've done. The cabin, the accounts, the insurance claims, everything will be returned as Dad intended. And the forgery will be admitted. Or we go to court." Mark's face paled. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He realized I meant what I said. He realized I was no longer the grieving widow they thought I was. That night, I sat alone on the porch again, staring at the stars reflected on the water. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, I knew it was a fight I could win. I had the truth, I had evidence, and I had the courage Raymond had always believed I possessed. They had underestimated me, and I would make them regret it. The morning after I confronted Mark and Melissa, I woke with a strange sense of purpose. The adrenaline from the previous night had settled, leaving me calm but alert. I knew that confrontation alone wouldn't be enough. They were clever, used to moving fast and thinking they could manipulate everyone around them. I had proof now, but proof alone doesn't win battles. Strategy wins battles, and I had a strategy forming. I started by reaching out to neighbors quietly, one by one. I didn't want anyone tipping Mark or Melissa off. I needed allies, people who had seen what was happening or who could corroborate small details. Mrs. Jennings, who lived 2 doors down, had noticed strangers coming and going from the cabin in the days after Raymond's funeral. Mr. Patel, the retired mailman, mentioned he had seen Mark carrying boxes labeled with official-looking papers and shipping labels. Each account added to a pattern, a trail they couldn't hide. By the afternoon, I had a list of people willing to speak if needed. I documented everything meticulously, taking notes, recording dates, times, and names. My house, once filled with quiet grief, now felt like a command center. The living room table was covered with files, my laptop and papers spread like a battlefield map. Raymond's voice felt close, almost tangible, urging me to keep going. to stay focused. That evening, I called Thomas. "Thomas," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've gathered more witnesses, more details about what Mark and Melissa have been doing with the cabin and the accounts. What's the next step?" He was quiet for a moment. "Elaine, this is exactly what we need. You're building a case that's hard to ignore. The next step is to use the legal tools we have to put pressure on them. Injunctions, subpoenas, make it impossible for them to move anything without oversight. And keep documenting every interaction. Every word matters." I hung up and leaned back in my chair. The room was quiet except for the hum of the ceiling fan. I realized that what I was doing wasn't just about the cabin or the accounts. It was about truth. It was about justice. It was about proving that betrayal and greed could not simply take root without being challenged. The next day, I returned to the cabin. I needed to see how they were acting, what moves they were making. As I drove up, I saw Melissa through the window, making calls, clearly coordinating something. My heart sank briefly at the sight, but then I remembered the recording I had made. I was ready. I had leverage. I walked around the property quietly, noting changes they had made. New paint, new landscaping, even new appliances. It was clear they were trying to present the cabin as a clean slate, erasing any trace of Raymond. But I knew that beneath the surface, evidence remained. Receipts, delivery slips, shipping labels, traces of their manipulation. I spent hours photographing and documenting everything, making sure nothing could be contested later. Every document, every mark, every alteration was recorded. I even checked the mailbox. A few letters were addressed to Mark at the cabin, probably notices about potential buyers. I slipped them into my bag. Each paper was another piece of the puzzle, another confirmation that they were acting with intent, not ignorance. Back home, I laid out all the evidence. The folder looked enormous, but every page was a story, every receipt a statement. I could feel the weight of it, the gravity of what I was about to do. I wasn't just a mother protecting her husband's legacy. I was a woman reclaiming her life, her home, and her dignity. That night, I received a call from the local reporter, someone who had been covering stories in Willow Bend for years. He had heard whispers about the conflict over the cabin and the accounts. "Elaine, I hear you've got quite a story," he said. "Would you be willing to talk on record?" I hesitated. Public exposure was dangerous, but it was also a weapon. If people knew what Mark and Melissa had done, it would be much harder for them to move freely. "Yes," I said finally, "but I want to do it on my terms. I have documents, recordings, and witnesses. I want the truth told, not rumors." He agreed, and we scheduled a meeting. As I hung up, I felt a strange calm. The story was no longer mine alone. It was about to become public, and that was exactly what Mark and Melissa hadn't planned for. The following week, I worked closely with Thomas to file the injunctions and subpoenas. Each move was calculated, precise. The legal system can be slow, but when you're prepared, it can be formidable. By the end of the week, Mark was legally restricted from selling the cabin, withdrawing money from accounts, or making insurance claims. Everything was frozen. I watched from my living room window as he stormed out of the cabin, visibly frustrated. Melissa followed, trying to soothe him, but the tension between them was palpable. They were realizing that their game had consequences, and they were powerless to stop it. That night, I sat on the porch, the folder of documents on my lap. I thought about Raymond, about how proud he would be to see me standing my ground, fighting for what was ours. I whispered into the wind, "I'm not done yet. This is just the beginning." Over the next few days, I received more calls from neighbors, each adding pieces to the puzzle. There was the handyman who had seen Mark sneaking out late at night with boxes of papers, the delivery man who remembered Melissa signing for shipments she shouldn't have, the accountant who had noticed discrepancies in the accounts. Every tip, every observation was another thread in the web I was weaving. I began compiling it all into a single, comprehensive file. It was exhausting work, but necessary. Each piece of evidence reinforced the other, creating a picture so clear that even the most stubborn doubters could see the truth. One evening, as I was organizing the files, Mark called again. "Elaine, you need to calm down. This is going too far," he said. "I'm calm," I said, my voice steady. "I'm just making sure the truth is out there. And soon, everyone will see it." "You don't know what you're doing," he said, his tone sharp now, edging toward desperation. "I know exactly what I'm doing," I replied. "And I know what you and Melissa did. It's over, Mark. The cabin, the accounts, the insurance, you won't touch any of it without consequences." He hung up abruptly, and I felt a rush of relief. The first crack had appeared in their armor. They were scared now. They knew I had the upper hand. The following morning, I received an unexpected visit from one of Mark's former business associates. He had heard about the legal actions and wanted to warn me that Mark and Melissa were trying to find ways around the restrictions. I listened carefully, taking notes. Every detail was valuable. I was learning more about their strategies, their weaknesses, and their desperation. That afternoon, Thomas called with news. "Elaine, the injunctions are holding. The bank accounts are frozen, the cabin cannot be sold, and the insurance claim is paused. They're trapped, but they're looking for any loophole." Stay vigilant. I felt a sense of satisfaction. They had underestimated me, assumed grief would paralyze me. They thought I was weak, tired, old. But I wasn't. I was ready, alert, and focused. By the end of the week, I had solidified my plan. I would gather all witnesses, all documents, all evidence, and prepare for the day when Mark and Melissa could no longer deny the truth. I would confront them not just legally, but publicly, showing everyone the lengths they had gone to betray me and my husband. That night, I sat on the porch, looking at the moon reflecting off the water. I whispered to Raymond, "It's working. They're scared. They know they can't win. And soon, everyone will see them for who they really are." For the first time since the funeral, I slept through the night. I knew the fight was far from over, but I had momentum now. I had evidence, witnesses, and the law on my side. And I had the determination to see this through, no matter how long it took. They had tried to bury him, tried to take it all. But I was fighting back, and this time I would not lose. The morning after I felt the first real relief, I realized the fight wasn't over. It had just shifted. Mark and Melissa were cornered now, but cornered animals can be dangerous. I had frozen accounts, stopped the sale, and paused the insurance claims. But I had to be careful. One wrong move, one misstep, and they could scramble to hide evidence or manipulate witnesses. I decided to check in on the cabin again. I had a routine now, early mornings, quiet walks, careful observations. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed fresh tire tracks. Someone had been there overnight. I didn't panic. I had learned that fear wasn't useful. Observation was. I walked around the perimeter, noting footprints, scuff marks, and even a faint scent of Melissa's perfume near the back door. Inside, I noticed a small discrepancy. A box that hadn't been there before was tucked under the kitchen counter. I opened it carefully. Inside were papers, delivery receipts, invoices for materials, and a few letters addressed to Melissa. They weren't signed by Raymond or Mark, but they confirmed a pattern of activity. Renovations, shipments, and attempts to mask their financial moves. I photographed everything and drove straight to Thomas's office. He looked up from his papers and raised an eyebrow. "What do you have this time?" "Proof that they're still moving behind the scenes," I said. "It's not just the cabin. They've been trying to reroute materials, hide invoices, and manipulate documents. Look at this." I handed over the photos. Thomas studied them, nodding slowly. "Good work, Elaine. Every piece adds to the case. They're making mistakes because they're desperate. And desperation leads to exposure." That evening, I called the neighbors I had spoken to before. I asked if anyone had noticed unusual activity. Cars parked at odd hours, deliveries, or strangers asking questions. Mrs. Jennings mentioned she had seen a man carrying boxes to the cabin late at night. Mr. Patel remembered someone trying to sneak packages through the back gate. Each account added to a pattern, another thread in the web I was weaving. By the weekend, I had compiled a comprehensive file: documents, photos, recordings, witness statements. Everything was organized, cross-referenced, and ready for legal scrutiny. I could feel the weight of it, the magnitude of the truth I now held. It was undeniable, unshakable, and growing stronger every day. I decided it was time to escalate publicly, carefully. I contacted the local newspaper, sharing verified details of the forgery, the attempted sale, and the manipulation of accounts. I provided evidence without revealing sensitive personal information. The reporter, intrigued and professional, agreed to cover the story responsibly. Within days, whispers in Willow Bend became chatter. Friends, neighbors, and even casual acquaintances began talking. Mark and Melissa realized the stakes had changed. The longer they delayed, the more attention the story attracted. One evening, Mark came to the house. I wasn't expecting him, but I was ready. I opened the door to see his face pale and tight with tension. Melissa was behind him, equally strained. "Elaine," Mark said cautiously, "we need to talk." "Yes," I said evenly. "We need to talk about everything. Not just the cabin, but the accounts, the insurance, and the documents you forged. Not just for me, but for everyone watching now." He hesitated. "Mom, can't we handle this privately?" "No," I said. "You've tried that. You thought I'd be quiet. You thought grief would paralyze me. You were wrong." Melissa stepped forward. "Elaine, please, we can—" "Stop," I said firmly. "No explanations. No justifications. The truth is out and it cannot be hidden. I have proof, witnesses, and now public awareness. Every move you make from here on out is under scrutiny." Mark's jaw tightened. He looked like he wanted to argue, but he couldn't. Melissa tried to maintain composure, but her hands shook slightly. I took a deep breath. "You have two choices. You can admit the forgery, return the cabin, and correct the financial manipulations. Or we go through the legal process and every detail becomes part of a permanent record. The choice is yours and the clock is ticking." For the first time, I saw panic. Their confidence, so carefully cultivated, was cracking. The perfect image they had tried to maintain was crumbling, and I could see them calculating, realizing that any resistance would only make things worse. After they left, I sat down with my notes, reviewing every document, every recording, every witness account. I realized that I had taken the fight beyond the legal realm. I had made it impossible for them to hide, impossible for the truth to be ignored. The following days were tense. I monitored every move, every phone call, every interaction I could. I wasn't spying. I was safeguarding, documenting, and preparing. The moment they made a mistake, it would be undeniable. It wasn't long before Mark did. He made a misstep with a bank transfer, trying to move funds despite the injunction. I had it documented, time-stamped, and photographed. Thomas filed the immediate complaint. Another crack appeared in their armor. Melissa made her own error, trying to schedule a meeting with a potential buyer under false pretenses. I had a recording. Another mistake. Another piece of evidence. I realized then that their desperation was working in my favor. Every attempt to push forward, every move to outsmart the law, only strengthened my position. I was patient, strategic, and relentless. One evening, I walked along the shore, the wind cold on my face. I thought about Raymond, about the life we had built together, about the memories now threatened. I whispered into the ocean, "It's not over, but it's coming. They will not win. I promise." By the end of the week, I had consolidated all evidence, all witnesses, all recordings into one comprehensive package. The legal team was ready. The public story had reached the right ears. Mark and Melissa had nowhere to hide. That night, I sat on the porch, folder in my lap, staring at the moon's reflection on the water. I realized how far I had come, from a grieving widow to a woman in control, armed with truth and determination. They had tried to bury him, tried to take it all, but I had fought back. And soon, everything they had taken would be restored, every lie exposed, every betrayal revealed. For the first time in weeks, I felt a deep, unwavering sense of purpose. The fight was almost over, but the victory would be complete. I whispered softly to myself, "It's almost over, Raymond. We're almost there." The morning was crisp, the sky pale and wide, as I drove toward the cabin one last time before everything would be resolved. I didn't feel fear anymore, only focus. The long fight, the nights of worry, the hours spent gathering evidence and documenting every move of Mark and Melissa had led to this moment. Today, I would reclaim what was mine, what had always been mine. As I approached the driveway, I noticed the SUV parked haphazardly near the cabin. I recognized the driver, Mark, fidgeting with his phone, likely trying to make one last arrangement before the legal consequences hit. I didn't slow down. I parked at the edge of the yard and stepped out, feeling the gravel crunch beneath my shoes, the familiar scent of pine and ocean hitting me. I'd spent years walking this path with Raymond, never imagining I'd be doing it alone, fighting for what we had built together. But now I was stronger than I ever imagined. The front door creaked as I entered. The cabin was quiet. Too quiet. I could sense the tension hanging in the air like a storm cloud. I laid my folder of evidence on the kitchen table. Photographs, receipts, recordings, witness statements. Every piece meticulously documented. I had prepared everything for the meeting with the lawyer, for the final confrontation that would bring it all to light. Mark and Melissa arrived shortly after. Melissa's posture was rigid, trying to maintain composure, but her hands betrayed her. Mark's eyes darted nervously to the folder on the table. I could see it in their expressions, the realization that their games had ended. "Elaine," Mark began, trying to sound confident. "We should talk." "No," I said firmly. "We are not talking about feelings. We are talking about the truth, about actions, about the forgery, the manipulation, and the theft of everything Raymond and I built together." Melissa opened her mouth, then closed it. She knew I wouldn't be swayed by excuses, charm, or pleading. I spread the evidence across the table, methodically, letting each piece speak for itself. This folder contains everything: the forged power of attorney, manipulated accounts, attempted sale documents, and recordings of conversations showing intent. Every action you took to benefit yourselves at the expense of me and my late husband is documented. Mark swallowed hard. "Elaine, please." "No," I said again, my voice calm but firm. "No more lies, no more attempts to rewrite the story. This is the truth, and it will stand." Melissa's eyes flicked to a photograph of the cabin in its original state, before their renovations. I noticed the moment, the flicker of guilt, or at least the realization that the life we had built together was being exposed piece by piece. I stood and faced them, my spine straight, my voice unwavering. "You tried to bury him, Mark. You tried to take everything. But I have fought back. I have documented, I have observed, and I have prepared. And now the world will see what you've done." Mark's hands trembled slightly. "Elaine, we didn't mean—" "I don't want your meanings," I interrupted. "I want accountability. I want the cabin, the accounts, and the insurance to be returned to their rightful state. And I want the forgery admitted. It ends here." Melissa's voice cracked. "Elaine, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said, stepping closer. "You underestimated me. You thought grief would weaken me. You thought I would allow you to rewrite our lives for your gain. You were wrong. For a long moment, silence filled the cabin. The weight of the folder, the photographs, the recordings, all of it pressed down on them. They realized the fight was over, not because of me alone, but because the truth cannot be denied when it is fully exposed. Thomas arrived shortly after, and together, we reviewed every detail, ensuring the legal steps were in place. Subpoenas, injunctions, and evidence would leave no room for escape. Mark and Melissa could see the certainty in the process, the inevitability of accountability. As the day went on, the tension in the room shifted. Defiance gave way to resignation. They had no more tricks, no more hidden moves. The truth had cornered them. By late afternoon, we signed the documents that restored control of the cabin to me. The accounts were corrected, and the insurance company acknowledged the forgery and froze further actions. Every attempt they had made to take advantage was reversed. I walked through the cabin slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the little details Raymond had chosen. It was ours again. The familiar sense of wood and salt air, the memories of years spent together, the quiet comfort of home. They were all intact, restored. Outside, neighbors who had followed the story cautiously, some offering quiet support, some merely observing, nodded in acknowledgement. The community had witnessed the truth unfold, and with it, the justice that had been denied for so long. That evening, I sat on the porch with the ocean stretching before me. The sun dipped low, casting gold and orange across the waves. I thought about Raymond, about the life we had shared and the fight I had endured. I whispered his name into the wind. We did it, Raymond. We stood firm, and we prevailed. I realized something profound. The fight hadn't just been about the cabin or the accounts. It had been about resilience, about refusing to be silenced or underestimated. It had been about reclaiming agency, dignity, and the right to honor the life we had built together. Mark and Melissa left Willow Bend soon after, their reputations marked by their actions. The cabin remained ours, a sanctuary restored, a testament to what determination, truth, and courage can accomplish. I spent the following weeks repairing small damages, restoring what had been changed, and bringing the cabin back to its familiar comfort. Each repaired floorboard, each polished countertop, each photograph rehung on the walls felt like a reclamation not just of property, but of memory, love, and life itself. And every night, I sat on the porch, looking at the stars reflected on the water, whispering to Raymond, "We fought together, even if you weren't here. We defended what's ours, and I kept my promise." The story of betrayal, deceit, and attempted theft ended not in despair, but in triumph. Not because I was strong alone, but because I refused to let lies and greed define my life. I stood firm, documented truth, leveraged every tool, and faced the people who thought they could take it all. They had buried him, tried to take everything, and thought I would fall. But I fought back. And in fighting back, I didn't just reclaim what was ours. I reclaimed myself. The cabin was quiet again, the ocean steady as always. I smiled, feeling a peace I hadn't known since the funeral. This was our home, our life, our memory preserved. And I knew no matter what came next, I had the strength to face it, to stand firm, and to fight for what was right.